ask for sorry? Okay, thanks.
Thank you for offering to have
Oh, sure. No, well, that's not bad.
it. I did read it.
Good. I had it before, and I didn't know what it
I call to order the special September 8th meeting of the Committe School Committee. Just a couple of opening comments. On August 6th, the MSBA voted unanimously to move the Minuteman Building project to the final schematic design phase. In addition, they praised the professionalism of our efforts, expressed their dedication to vocational education, and strongly endorsed our proposed school size of 628 students, going so far as to state that they would not support a school size smaller than 600 students, since such a school would not make sense either financially or educationally. In effect, they agree with the rationale put forth by the administration and by this committee when we voted for the 628 student option. In moving forward, there are two challenging goals that must be pursued in parallel. Both of these goals are complicated and have strict timelines. One goal is to secure the right to incur the debt required for the building project. The other goal is to develop a final schematic school design within the MSBA process that maximizes both the educational benefits for our students and the value to our district towns. Since these goals are so important, we will postpone the usual start of the year school committee business until next week and dedicate this entire meeting to presenting information regarding the goals to school committee members. Two brief announcements before we begin. First, Cheryl Mahoney's term has come to an end, and we now have a new school committee member from Boxborough, by definition a glutton for punishment, since Vincent Amoroso is also the chair of the Boxborough Board of Selectmen. You see what I'm saying? And we thank him for his service and we welcome him to our committee. Thank you very much for attending.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the welcome, Chairman Stuman.
Second, communications will play a major role in pursuing our goals. As part of the communication effort, Ford Spalding and myself will be hosting 3 meetings with member town officials, primarily selectmen and FinCom members. And you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, Ford. Each of these meetings will cover the same material. We are only holding 3 of them so that the member town officials can select the most convenient date. The purpose of these meetings is to present information regarding the next step in the building process, and, most importantly, to give officials an opportunity to ask questions and to express their concerns. These are not meant to be school committee meetings, but they will be open to school committee members. Since I recognize that one or more of these meetings may attract a quorum of school committee members, I will have them posted as school committee meetings, so we don't have to turn away any school committee members in the event that by accident we reach a quorum. I also believe that Kevin Mahoney, are you going to be joining us for all 3 of these meetings?
Yes.
Thank you. Kevin Mahoney will be there for available as a resource for financial information. The dates of these meetings are Monday, September 21st at 7 o'clock p.m., Monday, September 28th at 7 o'clock p.m., Friday, October 2nd at 8 o'clock a.m., 2 in the afternoon, 1 in the morning. More detailed information on these meetings will be sent out in the near future. That is the near future, so I'm accurate, at least once during this meeting. And it is being recorded by David Jones. So I have nothing more to say, and we go immediately to the superintendent's report. Ed Bocco.
Thank you. We have been working on a draft project prospectus. This is the latest draft. We hope to have a final draft by this Friday. We had an email glitch on Friday, so we weren't able to work on it over the weekend. And this, I can just give you some of the highlights of the contents of table of contents. There'll be the Educational Alliance, you may recall, has been retained to do a sort of a third-party review of the different aspects of the building project as well as the district in regards to the project. So they have sections in here on project capacity, scale, and utilization, new campus design, construction estimates, operating costs.
Did you say what thing is your, we don't have it?
No, you don't have it.
No.
It's a draft that will be ready this, we'll have a longer discussion on it at the 15th, the week from today. So they've done sort of an independent third-party review, and they conducted focus groups of teachers, of students, of advisory committee members, parents, conducted all those focus groups, did some research in regards to career academies. There's language that they use that I'm not used to using, but in regards to enrollment and projections. And so all that, those summaries are going to be provided to the school committee in the next packet that's going out Friday, and we can have a discussion around it at the next meeting in more detail. The thing we wanted to show you now is the recruitment video. I don't know if you've all seen this. It's on our website. We've gotten a lot of favorable feedback on it. It was done by Andrew Mudge, the principal of Black Kettle Films. He's the one responsible for the video we did a while ago on, what was the first one? It's just on the project? Yeah. So he's great, and the kids really love this too, so.
Let me add is, this is really why we're all here. You see this film, it's the reason why we're here to support Minuteman.
I ended up coming to Minuteman because I knew I wanted to work with my hands, and I knew I wanted to do carpentry.
Coming to Minuteman made sense for me because it gave me the opportunity to learn more about marine biology and environmental science.
I chose to come to Minuteman because of the shops.
I knew I liked biotech and engineering, I just wasn't sure which one, and I was able to choose, and I've loved my choice ever since.
I chose Minuteman because I wanted to do cosmetology.
I chose to come to Minuteman because I am hands-on.
I chose Minuteman because I saw that Minuteman helped you prepare for the future.
It's like every other school, except we have one different class. Instead of a study, we have a trade for the whole day for 1 week, every 2 weeks, that we get to learn and use later in life.
It really feels like you're stepping into the real world. It feels like after you spend your week in academics, you step into a working world. You get to choose the field you want to go into. So it's interesting, and every day is interesting, and every hour of every day in chapter is interesting. We recently worked with an organism called E. coli, which everybody has in their gut, and we treated it with a very specific enzyme called the PGLO enzyme, which basically is a system of genetic modification where we cause these single-celled organisms that we grow in our lab every week to become luminescent. It was really cool.
We'll go to different streams and test the quality of the water, and being able to learn stuff outside and doing it actually in the field as opposed to just hearing about it in the classroom.
I'm designing a maple baseball bat that doesn't splinter when the ball hits the weak spot. That's really cool because, I mean, it's something that could actually be put into effect today.
I love cars. there's something about tightening a bolt that really motivates me to get the job done.
Things that people can look at and use for a purpose. Art. I create art.
One thing that I enjoy the most is when I'm all done and the client gets out of my chair and they have the biggest smile on their face. That puts a smile on my face as they walk out the door, knowing that I accomplished what I was supposed to do and they enjoyed what I had done and they'll come back. Minuteman teachers are extraordinary.
They are always there to help. They will go out of their way.
The teachers and the students have a real bond, a real true friendship that you can't usually find anywhere. What you want to see yourself do, they will help you get to that goal.
The kids in my shop are like my family. When you spend 4 years with people, you kind of get really close. I know like if I ever need anything, they'll always be there for me and I'm always there for them.
The shop has become a family, and you really come to depend and appreciate on every single person in your shop.
They put others in front of themselves. Kindness is amazing. These kids are loyal to you and they will help you with whatever you need.
Next year, I plan to go to the University of New England and double major in environmental science and marine science.
I plan to apply to several colleges, including UMass Amherst, Boston College, Holy Cross.
I'm gonna go to Hope College. I'll be majoring in engineering.
What my friends back home don't understand about Minuteman is that kids go to college. You can really become anyone you want.
Just because it's a vocational school doesn't mean that we don't get the same education as other people. We get just as much and more. We get all of the academics that you would learn at a regular high school and the addition of the career major that you choose.
Every day is something different.
Everyone here wants to be here.
Minuteman is the high school of the future.
Yeah, we've sent this to area cable TV, all the area cable TV outlets, and many have agreed to show it. I don't know if any of them have scheduled it yet, but it will be shown. It was really all about kids. No one over the age of 18 spoke a word in that video. And we showed it to a group of students last week, or this week, no, last week, and they're mesmerized by it, actually.
Students here or somewhere up in it?
The students here who started new hadn't seen it yet. So, we're also working with Andrew and his company to document the process that kind of leads into item C here. For completing the schematic design, we have a number of stakeholder groups that we're meeting with. This past week I met with seniors and juniors, or sophomores and seniors, next week juniors, and he's kind of documenting their involvement, their ideas, as well as our advisory committee meeting folks who are going to be meeting in a few weeks. So when we get to the end of this whole process, we'll have sort of a documentary on how we got where we got. In your packet at the beginning on page 3, I just outlined sort of some of my ideas about the final schematic design process, trying to understand and identify for folks what my role is, what the school building committee role is, school committee role. Basically, my job over the next 8 to 9 weeks now is to translate the needs of the school, translate the needs of the students and the teachers to the designers, so that communication happens in a way where what they create in schematic design is going to serve the needs of the kids. It's a pretty intensive process, I've realized. at this point, because of some of the accelerated timelines that have been put upon us by MSBA and some of the decisions that have to be made, but I'm very confident that we're going to be able to come up with a very effective and efficient schematics to complete in this module 4 that we're in. I don't know if anyone had any questions about this process, or we're going to talk a little bit more about it in the school building report. Yes.
I just wanted some clarification on what Jeff's comments were regarding the MSBA's approval to move to Module 4. What they were saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that they were accepting Minuteman's logic and so forth for both enrollment and for financing, right?
Not for financing. Financing comes in Module 5.
Okay.
When
Then it went on to say that they would not build a school for fewer than 600 students. That's Minuteman. That's Minuteman belongs for all schools in general.
In their August 6th statements and the subsequent documentation they provided afterwards, they put into writing that they would not approve Minuteman at less than 600 students.
Okay, so that doesn't apply to other schools, just specifically Minuteman.
At an MSBA meeting, I was going to answer your question. I'll wait.
Yeah, because Ms. Pichetti, in her email that was sent to the director of the MSBA, she said that she had reviewed Minuteman's logic and their proposal, and that she had accepted the numbers. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it was interesting. The 600 number that came out was actually the first time I had heard them definitively say that they would not support building a school on less than 600. And they also told us at a meeting that there was a school out, and I don't know where it was, but in the western part of the state, there was a high school, and it was under 600. And they did approve them only if they moved the middle school in with that building, so it would be over 600 students. So it seems to be a trend of where they're going. They recognize that it just doesn't make sense to go below that. But interestingly, Dave, it came from them, never came from us. They were the ones that were so definitive. And seeing that we want to honor the way they do things, it behooves us to live by that.
The reason I brought it up is because looking at the profiles on the PBSE website, there are 6 schools right now that have fewer than 600 students. I was just curious as to what their rationale was.
So I don't know if this comes under your line item or Ford's, so to ask it now. Just to reiterate the important point, we have about 5 weeks to translate the school into a document. This is a very short period of time to finish that process. And the question I have for the superintendent, which I would like for him to spend a minute answering here, is what is the expertise that is being brought to this aspect of the project, such that at the end of this time, we will have done the best that we can in coming up with a design that maximizes the education of the kids and maximizes the value of the towns in spending the money well in regard to our designs. I'm asking now, what is the level, where's the expertise, who's going to be looking at this along the way over the previous few years, obviously, but also over the next few weeks?
Well, Ford can augment my comments, I'm sure, but I have great confidence in the school building committee. And at the last school building committee meeting, a smaller group of folks with experience in construction of schools, experience with the MSBA architects, agreed to meet as I guess we defined it as an informal group to review in detail and be a part of the design process with Castle Booz Architects and our owner's project manager, Skanska. So there's at your table, it's entitled 4C. You can see a whole series of events that have been occurring and will continue to occur through the November timeframe up towards our submission December 1st. And this small working group from the school building committee has been invited to attend all of these meetings, and in fact they've attended some already. Just last week's activities, we had a tour. Well, I should back up a little bit. We had on one or 2 days, it all's running together for me. We had about 100 staff and students attend working sessions with myself and the design team. Ford participated. The school building committee member from Boxborough participated in looking at the plans as they were and giving very specific feedback to the architects throughout that long day. There's a lot of collective wisdom in the school already, especially in the kids, who, if you think about it, the kids are the only ones that actually go through the whole building for 4 years. And their commitment to this process is, I've spoken of it before, but I just can't say enough about how intelligent they approach it, how engaged they are, and they all have an energy level that is really unmatched in stakeholder groups. They've already provided a lot of input that has been incorporated into plans that I saw today. I was at Castle Booz all afternoon in Foxborough working with the design team and their consultants around different aspects of the plans. On Thursday, I think it was, we took a dozen of us or so, visited New England Studios in Devens, the Wyndham Regional Career Center in Brattleboro, the New England Youth Theater, all in preparation for a technical meeting this Thursday with technical theater consultants and then security people in the afternoon and site experts in the afternoon this coming Thursday. So my confidence level in Castle Booz, I've spoken about them quite a bit. They're just finishing a $76 million repair project at Baypath Regional Vocational Technical School. And it's obvious to me that they've learned a lot about how vocational technical schools operate. There are a lot of issues that they had to deal with there that we may or may not have to deal with, but I feel their capacity is growing. And Skanska has been great. Just my personal experience, I was part of the largest public works project in the history of Vermont when we built a middle school, a high school, and a vocational school all on the same campus. And we did it while it was occupied. And it took 5 years. So Ford may want to augment some of my comments.
Yeah, I don't want, repetition is actually good in this, and I'm going to be repeating things you said, but in my experience with the building project, the more we can be repetitious, the better off we are. So what I want to point out is last Wednesday we were here from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. With students, with teachers, and with staff members, all at different times, and we had our OPM, owner project manager, was here, as well as 3 of the architects. That I know of, we have about 10 architects working on this project at Castle Booz. And the site that I saw, which was most amazing to me, and I get a little emotional, so I even had a few tears in my eyes, was 6 students sitting back where Liz is, and they were gathered around the table with tracing paper, going over the plans that were there. And they were redesigning, literally redesigning, moving the walls of the spaces. And Larry Trim, I think most of you met, came over to them and sat down with them and looked at what they were doing. And his comment was, we've been trying to figure that out. That's a great solution. And the kids, it's right, they are really engaged in this process because they are the only ones of all of us, but all the teachers that are in every part of the building all the time. And they did an amazing job. The day before that, Ed and I spent another, I think it was 10 hours, down at Castle Booze, and we went through every single bit of space in the buildings, just looking at square footage. Not designing it, but just looking at square footage. And we were using the MSBA's allotted square footage. So we were using that, designing the building. One of the things Ed said, and we're working on it, is how can we trim the cost of this building? And we're working at that. I will tell you, it's a very difficult job, but I think it's something that he is committed to, and the architects are committed to. So we are going to be doing that from now until the day we start construction, is finding ways to reduce the cost or bring in extra money, which I'm going to be talking to the selectmen about because I think that can be extremely helpful in helping to reduce the cost of this building. But, so I would say, to answer your question, the design team is terrific. Our OPM, I am so happy to have her aboard. Those that don't know, I love her background. I think she went to Melrose High, and when she was in Melrose, Medford and Melrose, she wanted to take as an extracurricular thing carpentry. Well, you're a woman, you can't do that. So they made her take sewing. And that wasn't really something that she wanted to do. She ended up graduating, and she joined the Carpenters Union. And was a member of the Carpenters Union for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And then from there, she went and got her undergraduate degree, and then she got her master's degree, and she's now our owner's project manager. She is the right person for this kind of a job, because I think she understands the trade that we're working on. So I think, Jeff, I have full confidence in the team, and I have full confidence that the Minuteman School Committee is going to turn around and not only help in the design, but help in making this thing happen, because it would be the least expensive route for our towns to go.
Alice?
I just wondered if Ford could speak briefly to the credentials of the people who are on the building committee that are in this small group, because it's a very impressive group of experts. You know, Dana Ham is here, the audience has seen him here, and Frank Cannon and so forth. I think it would be, you know, educational for the whole community to know the background of some of these people.
If Simon Bunyard from Boxborough, Simon was a selectman, which I didn't know, in Boxborough. I had done previously, and he is a project manager. That is his career, is as a project manager. So he's doing did the same kind of job and does the same kind of job as Marianne Williams. Dana Ham, who's in the back. Dana is currently the head of facilities at the Cambridge School System. Dana's built schools, he takes care of schools, he's done all that work, and Dana's a graduate of Minuteman, and Dana will be honored in a week or so in the Hall of Fame for Minuteman. So there is a dinner coming up, who I would suggest that you all look at your calendars and go to that. Peter Sugar is from Lincoln, and Peter is an architect, and he hasn't worked on schools, but he's an architect, and he knows that business. David Frizzell, David is the fire chief in Belmont. David took a report, which I think you've seen, which outlines all the work that has to be done, and he wrote to the design team a 3-page email about things that he noticed in there that need to be noted for fire and safety concerns for the building and security for the building. And it was an incredible email that he took the time to do. So this group is very good. Frank Cannon, I didn't mention him. Frank is from Concord. Frank has been on building committees. He was on the school building committee, I believe, in Concord, as well as other buildings. 3 of them, thank you. He is also been in the trades, and I don't remember what his profession was.
He's project manager
But
in large-scale construction.
He's been a project manager in large-scale construction. So We have other members of the committee, Jack and Ford and Alice, and there are others, but these are the people that we really needed on our building committee who are giving us tremendous help. Just so you know, just so people don't think that I did an untoward thing, we didn't form a subcommittee. Ed mentions a subcommittee. We didn't do that. We just don't have time to meet all the requirements of the open meeting law. It is just extremely difficult when we're having daily meetings and we want these people to go. So they are going down purely as advisors. To do that, the school building committee authorized that as a movement. So it's the only way we could do it because most of the meetings are in Foxborough and soon to be Boston. So
And it's less than one.
and
That group is less than one of the building.
exactly. So we thought it worked, and I think it does work.
Mary Ellen.
I just had a quick question. It says on the third that there was a tour of vocational technical schools. Which schools did you went?
We went to Wyndham Career Technical School last week, as Ed said, out in Brattleboro, Vermont. We have been, I don't remember the name, but Blackstone Valley. We've toured Blackstone Valley.
At one day it was in Vermont.
Note that, we went to Vermont for that day.
Yeah, that's
We've done another time at Blackstone Valley. I have been, actually with Alice, we went to Worcester Tech, which is an extremely interesting facility. Alice has been to all of them. But, Greater Lawrence, excuse me, we went to Greater Lawrence also. But we didn't do that last week, we've done it before.
Sharon, if you could have your hand up.
It says here that you have meetings, that you've already met with some of the students, and that you have additional meetings set up for students in some advisory committee. And program advisory committees, I know you said you have the meetings with the selectmen, primarily selectmen. I'm wondering about the community at large. I ask that because I know from the Lincoln School building projects, it was important that the community be involved all along.
Sharon, if they're with you, I'm going to get to that in my report.
Thank you.
And you're going to be here for that.
Thank you very much.
Well, and I also have two superintendent dinners planned, one on the 16th of September, which is prior to back to school night, and I'm inviting all the parents to come a little bit earlier prior to back to school night for, I think, hors d'oeuvres. We decided dinner was too much. And then on the 30th of September, the program advisory committee chairs and I'm hoping two or three business leaders, employers will come, and I'll have another dinner for them before our general advisory committee meeting. And then we kind of scored big, thanks to Mary Ann, and our big advisory committee dinner, which is the middle of October 14th, we have Lieutenant Governor coming. And we'll have another series of feedback sessions at that point. But I think most of the focus is on getting the schematics done. And so we're trying to pinpoint those stakeholder groups that are going to use the building, not necessarily pay for the building. I'm relying on Ford and Jeff to do that part of it over the next 8-9 weeks. And then once we get schematics submitted, we'll have another round of going out and showing what was submitted and getting some more feedback.
Is that in your report?
Yes, sir.
For its policy.
As I said, I'm going to be a bit repetitive, but I think it's important because it was sort of a kickoff for Module 4. The MSBA did unanimously vote on August 6th to approve us to move the schematic design Module 4 for 628 students. I think their letter to us was very clear on what they wanted us to do. One thing I found with MSBA, they like us. They like Minuteman for several reasons. Most importantly, we follow their rules. We do what we ask, because in my opinion, the most important job I personally have, and I hope the school committee has, is to preserve the 40% plus reimbursement to our towns. That's approximately $55 million of money that I think our towns can use. And I think if they don't have to spend it for repairs, they can do it on a new building. That will make a lot of sense. So I am committed to that, is to preserve that. I am also committed to follow their rules because they grandfathered us at a 40% reimbursement rate. Currently, if you went into the state for a project, you're going to be at a 31% rate. So again, that's a lot of money we're talking about, and I don't know of any community that doesn't look at money in a very serious way. And I think the building committee, myself, and I hope the school committee is absolutely committed to preserve that. I'm going to refer again to the schedule that you have that's dated September 3rd from SCANSA. You can see the meetings that started on August 6th, and these are the meetings currently scheduled. These are just current meetings. There are going to be many additional meetings, but it's all the way up through January 27, 2016. That is Module 4. And we need to follow their very tight schedule. For example, on November 17th, this committee and the school building committee are going to have a joint meeting to vote to move the documentation that you must prepare in Module 4. And I hope you all have read Module 4 because that's the document we have to follow. We need to vote to send that to the MSBA. And that's going to go to MSBA on December 1. Then it will be discussed at the MSBA board meeting on January 27. There will be a vote. Well, there'll be discussions with the MSBA before that, but that's when they take a formal vote. We found when we went from Module 3 to Module 4, we had several meetings with them to get to the date that the board meets. They don't like surprises. They didn't have any surprises. I know they received some letters from communities. They expected those letters, and they expected what was in them to be there. They just don't like surprises, so we're not going to surprise them. But this is a very tight schedule. Ed's told you about what we've done since August 6th in the last couple of weeks in our meetings. It is extremely important that the superintendent spend his time on the schematic report. To me, he's an educator. We have to get ready to educate our future students in this building and design that building. So I and others have asked him to focus 100% of his time, as much as possible, other than running the school building, to the schematic design. I have volunteered, and Jeff has volunteered, and I hope some of you will help me in reaching out to the community. That's reaching out to selectmen, that's reaching out to finance committee people, it's reaching out to school committee people, it's reaching out to citizens. You know, we had small meetings last time in all but one of our communities. We're going to be back out there, and I am committed to be out there 2 and 3 days a week, talking to as many people as we can, not to convince them of the project, to give them the facts so people understand the facts. So one thing I've noticed over the last months is the lack of information and facts that are out there, and our job is to try to help clarify those and answer questions. Module 4, you have Module 4, and you have a schedule, I believe, which was sent to you that came out from SCANSA. If I can find my copy, this one. But I have one to read. Literally. Well, I can't find it, so I'm going to have to use Vince's. Module 4, preferred schematic solution, option B, they call it. They've said that we can proceed with the building. We are going to work on the schematics. The schematics are not construction documents. That happens in Module 6. These are documents that are going to come up with pricing, and we're going to use two sources for our pricing. KBA is going to use one, and SCANSA has hired an independent company to do the other. So we're going to have two companies looking at the cost. So we're going to look at the schematic design and the cost. It's going to include the scope, budget, schedule, and submittal to DSEAE for approval. We need a letter from DESE for approval for this project. That is going to go out on the schedule and will be ready by December 1. And they are well aware of what's coming. And that's going over our education plan. When we're designing this building, we're designing it around the education plan that we approved. So that's important. So module 4 is in blue, yellow. You have to be aware of that. Module 5, we will begin in January after approval. Module 5 is the funding. That's when we go out to the communities and we ask our communities to support this project. And we're going to do that. We're going to go out to formally ask them to support our project. And hopefully, if we can get yes in all our communities, that will be terrific. And that's what we want to work towards. In the meantime, between now and then, we are going to be working on getting to yes, as I call it. And how do we get to yes? And you're going to be doing that from this day on into through the month of June of 2016. And we must always be cognizant of the school committee of what our guidelines for communications are, but we also need to bring citizens in all of our communities to help us. One of the things that I've heard over the last couple of weeks is, oh, if you went to a district-wide vote, which I haven't talked about and I'm not going to talk about, that's going to preclude or exclude citizens. Quite the opposite. We are going to work towards town meetings, but we want to have as many meetings with citizens as we possibly can. And we're going to ask you to all set them up. If there's one person there, I'll be there. But we need to have as many meetings as we can with citizens, with selectmen, with finance committee people, with school, anybody that will listen to us. And we need to go to them with the exact same story all the time and ask for their input. We've told you about the meetings with the selectmen, formal meetings with the selectmen and finance committee meetings on September 21, 28, and October 2. Really, the main purpose of that is for us to give a very brief presentation, but we want to hear from them. We want to hear what your questions, what your comments are. And we may not have the answers that day. It's going to be just Jeff, Ford, and Kevin. But we will get back to you with answers. And when we get back to you, it's important to know, we're not going to get just back to you. We're going to get back to everybody. Dave and Jared sent an email asking some questions, which I'm going to deal with in a minute. It's very important that questions come to us, but then we disseminate them at a meeting, either a building committee or a school committee or at some meeting. We're going to be meeting with district legislative representatives. That process is starting. We're going to meet with all of them. We want them to understand where we are, what we're going to do. And that I can just come back to you all and say, we need your help. You want to reduce the cost. Do you have any ideas of reducing the cost of this project? We tried about 3 years ago to get them to help, and they walked away. But if 16 towns, 16 selectmen, 16 school committee members, 16 times 3 or 5, all came to work with the legislators to see if we could get a little more money for this project. That would go a long way to helping, and I think it's time that we spend our efforts doing that. And we're going to meet with current and past parents who are in the district. We think it's very important that they know what we're doing and be engaged in it. Meet with the alumni. We want to communicate in all possible means. We communicate through the press, TV, electronically, face-to-face, anything that we can do. This is a tough thing to get through. And again, it's giving facts. That's all it is. Just telling people what the facts are. After Module 5, which is when the towns approve us moving forward, we then move to Module 6. And I invite you again to go to the MSBA website to understand what's there. But Module 6 is when we do the construction management, and when we put together our detailed design construction drawings, selection of subcontractors. The building committee at our last meeting decided that we are going to follow a process called CM at risk. That's when we would hire a construction manager after we receive approval. We hire a construction manager who is going to be a general contractor, excuse me, who is going to be working with us on the construction drawings. If you do that in partnership, you tend to have less overruns, and I think that's going to be very important. And the building committee thought that was the best way to go. Then Module 7 is actual construction. Module 8 is completing the project, and we are scheduled to occupy on or before September 2020. And Dave, you asked that question. We're scheduled to occupy on or before September 2020. It's 5 years from now. That's how long it takes. And then I thought about that a little bit, and I thought about the discussions about enrollment. And you know, your enrollment is here, and you're trying to get to 628 in district. The good news is, excuse me, we have 5 years to be making that work. And I think that's up to all of us, again, all of us in this room, selectmen, finance committee, school committee people, to work to try to increase enrollment. Let's not complain about how little it is. Let's do something to try to make it stronger. If we do that, it's going to be operating costs are going to be less expensive for us all. Dave sent an email, which you have at your table, and it was first dated, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was first dated around August 10th. And I shot Dave back an email, and I said, we're going to be answering this at the school committee meeting, and then he answered it for himself, and that's okay, because you know, he wasn't all that long. He was a lot, right? But, so I think this is, again, the way to do it. Building committee members, that's what we do when we get comments with this. So I've answered Dave your email, which is by September 2020. And Kevin, maybe you can answer some of the questions he had around finance, mainly in the district.
Sure, I think, David, I understood the question is you projecting what the debt service, the net debt service would be to the district, and then how that per pupil cost would be applied to non-resident students. The guidelines, the formal guidelines haven't been issued yet. So we're going by how we interpret the regulations, as well as a conversation that we had with officials from DESE at the Maha retreat a couple of weeks ago. But the methodology that we are assuming is that we'll be taking the annual debt service, which is about $4.7 million, that will be financed over 30 years on a level debt service basis. That's the net debt service that member towns would be, that the district would be responsible for. And then we would calculate that based on a per pupil cost. The per pupil cost on $4.7 million annual debt service divided by the enrollment capacity of 628 students is roughly $7,500. So to the extent that non-resident students attend, they be assessed, in addition to the tuition rate set by the commissioner, they'd be assessed as $7,500. And that $7,500 would then be used to offset the debt service. And the balance would be...
Before Dave answers the question, we talked about this earlier. The $7,500, which would be applied to the capital portion of an MSBA project with Minuteman. In addition to that, you have the tuition, which would be charged, which is approximately another
$17,000 in the trajectory.
$1,000. So we're now up to about what, $24,000 if you did that. Then you, on top of that, for an out-of-district student, they had special ed, it'd be another $4,000 or $5,000. And on top of that, you'll be responsible for transportation. So you're up to about $30,000 per student. And for an in-district student, it's if they did all those things, calling apples to apples, I think we're closer to that.
Well, it would be a little less, some of it depends on how much capital is being incurred by the member districts. I think we'll be covering that in that project prospectus that we're working on.
But it'll be less than the out-of-district if we have, hopefully we won't, because we're going to fill this with in-district students with all of us working on it. Sorry, Dave.
Thank you. So we're looking at 7,500 roughly as the maximum that we're going to be able to charge non-member tuition students. Okay, then, we have to wait for the DESE to come back with the actual guidelines that says how much of that $7,500 a non-member town will have to pay.
We're assuming that the way we understand the regulations, it will be the full 100% of the cost, unless the non-resident student has access to vocational programs, 5 or more from the district has sent. In that case, we understand it to be 75% of per pupil cost, which would be 75% of the $7,500.
And then that 25% would become part of the assessment.
That's
Member
right.
towns would have to assume a deficit and then it would become a subsidy for each of those
The
students.
district would assume the 25%.
Mary Ellen.
Just a quick question. Just saying that we don't have all the seats filled, capacity, then are the member towns then responsible for paying the extra for the empty seats?
Yes.
That completes my report. Jeff, I would hope that we would not only let anybody ask any question or comments that they have, it would be great.
Or like some comments from the visitors. Yeah, feel free to. Please, Len, come on up, state your name, where you're from, and then your question.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, is this on? Good evening, and thank you for having me as a guest this evening, in particular to Chairman Stulin for having me this evening, to Dr. Copeland for hosting the meeting here. My name is Len Simon. I'm the selectman in Sudbury. I did attend the meeting on August 25th of the officers of the school committee here again. In preparation for the meeting tonight, I went over the regional agreement, and I have a couple of questions, if I might. I've also had a chance to go over the document from council, from Ed Lennox, which is dated September 2. So the first question is this school committee intending to follow the regional agreement as it moves forward with attempting to gain, to acquire capital for the new building project?
We're bound by statute to follow our regional agreement, yes.
As I reviewed the regional agreement, and the one I have was last updated in 2014, March 11, 2014. Section 4, Roman numeral 4, Part I, incurring debt.
That's, excuse me, it's 1979 is the last one that was, I think, the proposed.
That's what they're proposed. Okay, if I have the wrong one, I beg your pardon. This was the draft, I take it, then of the one that was as I understand Mr. Spaulding's point.
Can I just correct one thing? We don't have a new regional agreement, just so you know. We're bound by the...
Just so that I understand, the school committee is intending, or this committee is intending to go to each town and to ask each town through the Board of Selectmen to hold a town meeting for approval of any further debt.
This school committee, to my knowledge, has not voted that. They've had just preliminary discussions of understanding. My personal belief might be different than the school committee's personal belief, But we are going to be talking, as I said, to every town, selectmen, finance committee people, citizens, and everybody about our building project to secure approval.
And is it, I know you're intending to speak with them, are you intending to ask for town meeting approval?
That would be up to the school committee. If you're asking me personally, I'll answer personally, yes. I think we should go to every town and ask them to vote. As long as we get a yes from the town, there's no reason to go to another mechanism. If we get a no from a town, then there's going to be a big reason to go. That's a personal thing.
Okay. Is that, just so that I understand, is that, I know you've had meetings on this before, particularly with the school building committee. Is that the essence, if I can ask the chair of the thought of this committee as a whole?
The committee has not voted. The committee has not voted a way of asking to incur debt. We've not voted, we've not made that decision yet.
Also, let me correct, the school building committee has not discussed how we're going to do that. That's not our role. That's the school committee's role. So we have had absolutely no discussions, right, on the method that we're going to use.
Speaking on behalf of the vote taken by the Sudbury Selectmen a few months ago, the feeling was that if this school committee is going to be asking to incur debt, that it would be, the way to do that would be to go through the town meeting route as opposed to the district-wide vote. And I believe that Arlington, Belmont, Wayland, and Sudbury have expressed that in a letter form, either to this committee or to the MSBA vote. So I realize you haven't taken a vote, but just so that you're aware, I believe that the boards of selectmen feel that we represent the residents of the town. The school committee rep is that, but it is the towns which are the district as opposed to the individual school committee representatives. And we ask, at least I ask, that you respect the towns as the entity which is the moving part, the living part, the part which will have a say in how debt is acquired or sponsored. So I ask that this committee take the town meeting route as it considers incurring debt.
Any other questions from spectators today?
And the reason I asked that is I did see the document which was produced, I believe it came from Minuteman, which was a comparison of project approval options. In fact, it was from Minuteman, it was dated July 7, 2015, and it talked about the pros and cons of both the town meeting route and the district-wide vote. And then there was a 3-page document entitled frequently asked questions and answers about town meeting vote versus district-wide vote. And from looking at those documents, it seems there was a leaning towards going to a district-wide vote. And to the extent that I can make the point, at least on behalf of the Sudbury Board of Selectmen, we ask that the town vote meeting route be taken.
This school committee has two options in order to move forward. And they're both perfectly legal options that have been used in the past by other communities. We may use one of them, we may use both of them. We have a lot of paper coming in front of us, we have a lot of people expressing their opinions. Haven't made a decision yet. There's going to be a decision on that is not going to be made in the very near future. And this committee is going to look at both options and take into account the voice of all the different interest groups, including the interest groups of the students and the parents. And we're going to make a decision on what we believe is best for moving forward, for fulfilling our obligation, best for our role, based on the evidence that is given to us and using our independent judgment. Because that's what we are. We are independent individuals who are part of the school committee whose main interest should be the school district and the benefit of its students, current and future. And we're going to look at both approaches, and in fact, we may do both. Could be. So, but we've heard it. We've heard arguments on both sides. We have a lot of paper. We have not voted yet. It's not something I can do to get the opinion of people when we haven't been presented with all the information that we need, and we have not come to make that decision, nor will we do so in the regular future.
Excuse me.
Glenn, I'd be interested, we have had a presentation about Module 4. Do you have any comments about how we're going to proceed with Module 4? And do you think we're proceeding the correct way? And number one, number two, will Sudbury be welcoming to us to come and meet with selectmen, finance committee people, and citizens, and arrange to help us talk to citizens about what we need to do for Module 4?
To answer a couple of questions in that. First, Minuteman has asked to come to speak to both the Board of Selectmen and to the Finance Committee in Sudbury, and on both occasions, we welcome you, and my sense is, I can't speak for the entire board, I think we would welcome you again to both of those. To the second part, or the first part, dealing with Module 4, we're aware of what Module 4 is, the preferred schematic design. I know that's been presented to MSBA, and I understand that that's due to MSBA completed Module 4, I think it's in January or February. I had understood from the letter from Mr. McCarthy that the vote from in MSBA or by MSBA was going to be in March. I may be wrong in that.
No, it's now going to be in January.
Okay, then.
Because we want it as early as possible, because if we go to the towns, we want to at least have MSBA's vote on it, and the school committee's vote, because in that, we're going to be determining what the design is going to be as well as the cost. So March would be a little late.
So you would at least wait until the MSBA has voted on the Module 4, the schematic, before going to the towns?
So we have to do that. But in the meantime, we're going to be using assumptions that we have. So we don't want to wait till January before we go out to the towns. We want to start today.
One quick correction on that. It's very hard for us to predict the future on timing because events, the MSBA may be delayed. We have a hard deadline of when we have to come up with a yes. And that hard deadline and events that transpire between now and then may force us to take one action or another. I'm hoping we're going to have time to go have as many options as we possibly can, but we can't predict events that are beyond our control as to delays and when they happen with the MSBA and all sorts of other things. So we can give no promises. We would like to delay it. We would like to delay it so that more information about the exact specification of the project is available. That would be, I think, ideal, but it can't be guaranteed because we do have a hard deadline, and if we miss the deadline, then we miss the deadline.
I understand your
deadline.
I think this is a segue to my question, and I want to echo what Sharon raised before, as well as repeat something that I raised in the building committee. I absolutely appreciate and think there's value in getting input from students, from the advisory board, from lots of users or whatever of the building. But I do think, and for you mentioned lots of community input, but most of it I thought was mentioned in Module 5. At least from my perspective, I think it's critical that we get community input from our elected and appointed officials and even citizens in Module 4 at some point prior to when this committee has to vote to go forward with Module 4 in mid-November. And time may not permit 16 meetings in towns, much like we had in the spring, but I would urge us to, at a minimum, have a municipal breakfast like we've had in the past before, somewhere before there, so that town officials, at a minimum, the people who are likely to be the advocates and the voices that citizens in our town listen to, had the chance to get a debrief on the schematic and the budget and all of that before we, as school committee members, are asked to vote on it.
I'm going to wrap this up. We have to get to the next item. I'm going to take one more because she's been patiently waiting on this issue.
I have a quick question, and Jack, I just wanted to say that they already set up 3 of those type of meetings before you got to the meeting.
Yeah, but those meetings, if I understood the building committee, are to talk about process because they are held well before we'll know what the schematic and the budget is. And so I think it's critical that our town officials and citizens get a chance to weigh in on the schematic and the budget, not just the process.
My question is to bring us back to the original topic, which was the school building project. So you had mentioned before setting up meetings in the towns to select on FinCom, school committee, obviously the council on aging, people like that. So what is the optimal time frame when you want us to set those meetings up? Because I can tell that most members of the school committee are going to go back home and start working on that. So what is the best time frame for those to be?
Now,
Right now.
there's no reason to wait. It was all module 4. We never mentioned module 5 in terms of our meetings. So module 4, I would set up the meetings now. We do know that it will not exceed, 144 million. So we can only work from that point of view. We can tell, and when we go to a meeting, we can certainly say this is where we are with our schematic design. We already know what's going to be in the building. If you look right over there, you can see what's in the building. The bubbles are there, and don't laugh at the, nobody did laugh. The bubbles are showing the proximity of what classes are going to be in each wing of the building. So we already know that. We can go out today, and I can talk to your selectmen, I can talk to finance committee people and all that, based on the knowledge we have today. Kevin's going to have some numbers next week at our school committee meeting. So, Alice, start setting them up. I have already met with a couple of selectmen from several communities, and I'm going to be meeting with a lot more. I'm going to be calling some of your selectmen individually and ask to speak with them also.
Can we have the meetings here in the cafeteria?
You can have them anything you want. I'm happy to go to your communities. So if you do that, Jeff is going to be available, and hopefully some other school committee members. So we can do it here or we can do it there. But I would not wait. We can go back again. There's no reason why you can't do it now. And then they can have some input and give us some suggestions. So Jack, you've said it several times. Go for it. Set up the meetings. Karen.
I'm just going to suggest that although we said we wanted to get to the selectmen and finance committees, I would encourage those selectmen and finance committees to arrange the meetings so that citizens can come and at least hear, if not participate in that part of the discussion. If only for the point of asking questions that we need to be prepared to answer when we come back to them closer to town meeting. And then, so that if the 3 meetings, I mean when we go out more to their communities, so the next step. But I would also encourage that those be televised or taped so that citizens in those towns can watch them later on. As most elections meetings are, but it doesn't always happen if they're being held in a larger hall. So those are my 2 points.
David.
Not for long, I have a quick yes and no question, or agreement question and then agreement. I feel that I have a fiduciary responsibility to the town. Do the officers agree or disagree with my position and my opinion?
You're not an officer, but
I'm not an officer, but I called what is that governing body? Yeah, MASC, and asked, and then they said that as school committee representatives, which an officer is a school committee representative, our obligation is to the students in the district that we serve. Because I had a town member say to me that my obligation was to listen to the town and represent the town. And I said I disagreed, and we got in a little bit of a back and forth. So I went to the MSBC, Thank you. And they said, no, it's to the school district. So,
I'm not going to go into the long-term variety of ways that individual members weigh their responsibilities to the district. Many members have different views on which end of the spectrum they are on here. We're not going to come to an agreement in it, nor do we have to. There's no specific law that states you have to do exactly one thing or the other. You have a lot of freedom in designating your role as it is. My personal belief is that there really is no, not for the most part, amongst these communities, a disagreement between those two roles. I think that's going to become more clear, but it's not for us to dictate that particular role from our members, despite what our personal opinion on it may be. And on that note, I would like to move on to item 5. We're going to have this thing on communication. We're going to be all over. The 3 meetings is just the tip of the iceberg to launch the effort. There's going to be a lot of discussion, a lot of meetings coming up with all the various interest groups as the project unfolds over the next few months. That I can promise you. The exact nature of those is still a little unclear. I'm sure we'll have lots of good ideas on that. But in the meantime, research survey results.
Chairman, as you know, this committee voted in July to endorse the superintendent's recommendation that the district retain the services of a professional research firm to ascertain a voter's sentiment about the school in general, its programs, their awareness of the building project, their feelings about the building project. So as a result of that vote, we retain the services of Yapa Research Incorporated, which is owned by David Palilogis, who is the nationally known pollster who does in USA Today a column called Palilogis on Polls. Dave Palilogis wanted to be here tonight. He told me via email this afternoon he wanted to be here personally to, quote, deliver the good news to the school committee. However, he is ill. He has sent in his stead 2 of his associates, Jason Prodiger, Senior Research Associate, and Adam Borowski, Research Associate. They're going to deliver the PowerPoint presentation which Dave himself prepared. And by the way, these funny-looking symbols up before research, that is actually free. And that spells it down. All yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Adam Borowski, as you stated. So we both work for David Palilogis. David has something with he has worked with 7 News, Boston Globe, Boston Herald, as well as USA Today. And we conducted this poll. This poll is designed to measure the attitude and opinions of voters in your guys' district on the building of the Minuteman School.
Yeah, so David's been polling here in Massachusetts for years and years. This is going to be 2016 as we get into the primaries. It's going to be my 4th election cycle working with David after New York. And just one really quick anecdote before we get into everything else. My best friend in college actually went to Minuteman and became friends instantly when we were at orientation together because I made a joke about the insulation value of his hair being quite high, and he immediately recognized that I was somebody doing my physics. And from that, he got into talking about Minuteman, and even later insisted on grabbing me by the campus years later just to show me where it was. So we're really excited to have a chance to work on this because there's a bit of a personal connection there too. This poll specifically was conducted. Total of 400 people were surveyed. It was conducted from the 25th of August through the 28th. All were live phone calls, and the results here carry a plus or minus of 4.9 percentage points at a 95% confidence interval, and we can talk about specifically what all that means. Dig into a little bit to the sample frame. What we did was we looked at each town, and each one is proportionately represented in the overall sample in terms of the percentage of registered voters that are in that town. We acquired a list of registered voters from Sage Systems, the same company that we use for any other data research poll, and also what some universities' local research center uses this company as well. The voters were split up 50-50 landline and cell phones, so that we were able to have an equal representation of both of those sources. Geographically, we grouped everything into 3 regions. So when you dig into the data further, there's some development. Gender was split 48% men, 52% women, which is the standard break that we use for all political surveys in the state in accordance with the percentages that tend to vote. And registration was an equal balance within each area that we defined of Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated. So that's the overall sample frame and methodology that was used. And yeah, so these are the numbers in terms of all of the sort of the specifics of that sample frame that we just talked through. 15% overall had actual students or graduates or close family friends who attended Minuteman High School. I would fall into that category, technically by people. And 53% knew someone who attended Minuteman High School. Sorry, I guess that would be me. Well, he's my best friend. These were the different towns and the way in the area that they were grouped into, 1, 2, or 3. The smallest area was Arlington and Belmont, which is area 3. The logic behind this was the towns that are in different areas are contiguous and share some sort of a resource together. The reason that we have to group towns into areas versus look at the individual towns is that with a 400 sample size, it's really tough for us to get granular at the town level and still be able to cut the data without the margin of error shooting through the roof. As a result, we have to look at things in larger areas to have a statistically significant read on the overall sample. So, getting into the results. General feelings, very positive and positive, are coming through incredibly strong here in terms of what are your general feelings on Minuteman High School. What are your general feelings about the quality of vocational tech programs at Minuteman High School? Again, very strong at 26%, actually very positive at 26%, and then positive at 38%. Okay, so this one, we're looking at data. The 2 questions that we're seeing are, do you believe that academic programs offered in vocational tech schools should meet the same standards as in other schools? 72% said yes. Do you believe that vocational tech schools buildings should meet the same safety and environmental standards as other school buildings? 93% said yes. The new Minuteman High School. Overall awareness and then shared costs. Are you aware that the Minuteman School Committee is looking to build a new Minuteman High School next to the existing school on land owned by the school? 45% said yes, they were aware of this. 52% said no, that they were not. So we see there's a pretty even split awareness in terms of this process and what's going on currently. If a new Minuteman High School is built, following the question asked, should the state pay a portion of the construction costs? 81% agreed yes. Minuteman High School accreditation. Are you aware that Minuteman High School is currently accredited by the New England Association of Schools and Colleges? Only 49% said that yes, they were aware of accreditation. However, the next one, how important is it that the school maintain accreditation? 81% agreed. So not terribly aware of the accreditation level currently, but they believe that it should be maintained, whatever that level is. Building a new high school. So this is a very standard type of question we ask, where some say, others say, type thing, to offer 2 varying, contrasting points of view. So some people say that the decision to build a new high school should be made by the individual town meetings in each of the 16-member towns. Others say that the decision to build a new school should be made by voters during a district-wide election held on the same day. Which of these options do you prefer? 39% said a decision made by each of the 16 town meetings, whereas 46% said a decision made by district-wide vote on the same day, with 15% undecided on that question. So this is really the meat of this whole presentation right here. If you had to vote, would you support or oppose construction of a new Minuteman High School if the state pays at least 40% of the eligible costs? 68.5% said yes, they would support. 8.5% said no, they would not support, with 23% remaining undecided. There's a few important things that we should lay out here with these numbers. We would call this a baseline support or organic support. This is not to say that if the election was held tomorrow or next week, that 68.5% would absolutely say yes. There are probably some no votes in that yes would support. There are probably some yes votes in this 8.5 no would not support. This is a snapshot in time based on what people are aware of right now, based on the information given to them in this question and questions leading up to this in the survey. Levels of support and opposition for a new Minuteman High School. So we asked people who supported and we asked people who opposed to rate the intensity of their support or of their lack or their opposition. And so the mean score, so the average, is much higher overall for those who were positive than compared to those who were opposed. And as you can see the distribution here, those who are positive are generally very positive, whereas you see those who oppose, it's more of an even distribution across that 10-point scale. So those who are in favor are fairly unified and being very intensely in favor. Those who oppose fairly spread out. So now we've got into looking at some of the specific issues or the specific things that people like or don't like. So thinking about your vote, which of the following is most important to you? Or I should have said when I introduced this, about motivation. The impact on students, 31%, was the most important element of people's vote. Following that, impact on their tax bill, 22%. And then in third place, condition of the current building, with 16% there. We may want to go back and forth between this slide and the next slide, just because there is an interesting thing going on here. So 31% impact on students, 22% impact on taxes. Most important to you. So let's go to the next slide now. All right. What is the greatest concern about plans to build a new high school? My taxes will go up 40%. So what is the difference between the 22 versus the 40? If we go back, in that 40%, there are these 22, but then there's also people who are concerned about the condition of the building and the impact on students. And I think what we can infer from this is that while people are concerned about taxes, the students, and I think by extension students, again, the condition of the building, are more important to people than just the taxes.
Alright, so this is like so looking deeper into the meat of our survey, found out we have a huge amount of support going towards pretty much every single demographic for every student. So our 69% was the average between all people. So we look into stuff like gender. So 60% of men would support and 74% of women would support of building a new school. Now we went by age, and age is pretty much just same all across the board. 62% for 18-35, 69% for 36-45, 66% for 46-55, 77% for 56-65, 62% for 66-75, and 75 plus is 79%. All showing very high support. Going up by income, and income also had a very high support as well. Surprisingly, there wasn't actually much of a difference. Usually lower incomes and higher incomes usually have a big difference. But we found it really wasn't that significant. They're all well above 50, with 69% under 50K, 74% under 100K, 70% under 200K, over 200K we had 70%. And then we also went by area. Now going off earlier, we grouped the towns just by the borders and sharing common and stuff. But every single area was in support of the Lakeview School. Out of the respondents, the most we had from Area 2, and they actually had the highest amount of support. So I think that you guys have really strong support from them. So 69% Area 1, 73% Area 2, and 62% Area 3.
Yeah, just real quick for reiterate, Area 3 is Arlington, Belmont.
Yeah. They may have like a higher population, but from our respondents, it's because of all of the towns that are included Area 2 towns, we had more people, so it kind of reflected more of our survey that we conducted. Going on to the next one, we did by political party, and we had a wide support there. Usually Democrats and Republicans don't agree very often, but here they continuously agree, although there was significantly less support from Republicans than Democrats, but we were still within the margin of error to be about 50%. So we had 72% Democrats, 59% Republicans, and 60% independents. And if we look at the next slide, if we went by the 4 levels on the minimum families, and obviously improved intensity of family graduates, 81% support, 67% from support of non-family graduates, 75% from non-graduates, and 59% from non-graduates. So it's still no matter what you guys are low over the margin of error of 50%. Go on to the next one. So we did the support levels among the modes of decision making. So as you guys were debating earlier about which method to go through smoking images, we found that it would be supported either way. To be 76% for the district-wide vote, and 63% for the town meeting, 61% we're not sure. Question?
How can those add up to more than 100%?
Oh, they're not going like for each individual question. So it's pretty much like if you like we're in support of a district-wide vote, yes or no. There wasn't a which choice. So that's the 76% of that 100.
Oh, wait,
So 2/3 said yes to both, and we're also not sure.
Yeah, the way to think about this is if you read it one bar at a time.
Yeah.
So among only those who favored a district-wide vote, 76% favored building a new Minuteman high school.
Yeah.
Among only those who favored town meeting, 63% favored building a new one.
Actually,
Among only those who
Jack,
are
is
sure.
that there are 200% of the people in favor. It's really strong result.
And go on to the next one, the support levels amongst the most important factors that were on the board. Obviously, students have been very high, 88% support, 81% support for personal feelings, obviously very positive feelings. 76% for jobs, 72% for building condition, 59% for town officials, 47% for tax bill. And then,
Just,
yep.
of the people who said the tax bill was the most important issue, 47% said they didn't support the bill.
Correct. All right, so then for the next one, support levels are among the greatest concerns, and obviously the biggest support, they actually didn't have any concerns, 9%, 76% for school not out of town, 71% of the school too big, and 64% for taxes, and 62% for more say in the matter. That's our conclusion on the last slide. So we found obvious, very positive feelings about the Minuteman High School and its programs. VOTEC should meet academic building standards, and there's overwhelming support for new construction. Okay. Yes, the intensity for the support was definitely higher than the opposition. And then the voting keys were impact around students, the tax bill, and the condition of the building.
So I have actually 3 questions. Do you have a breakdown of communities? Because it's, you know, 1, 2, 3. I'm just curious from our particular.
We go back up to
It's on the second page.
early slide.
She's saying how many respondents.
From response to which town?
We can look at it by area for you. We may be able to get the town breakdowns, but
That would be important.
I would really discourage looking at any town by town numbers just because there would be almost no correlation to anything with these statistics
So I'm just curious as to how the people in town actually contacted, because it's very, very.
Yeah, they're all different, and they're all proportionally put to how many registered voters are in each town. So some towns had like a higher amount, sometimes have less. But no matter what, each town was going to be an insignificant factor to statistically expand upon.
We can share the details of the sample frame with you, absolutely.
Sure, so the other question I have is, do voters actually know what district-wide vote is? Is it explained to them, or would you just ask them a question? Because I think that that's important.
We just asked them if it was going to be district-wide vote. We didn't explain it to them.
So
You said held on the same day. There was a sentence that explained it.
Yeah, we have a questionnaire.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if they know that it's, you can, my point is that if they had questions, would they go into a deeper?
No, that's the text that was read over the telephone.
Because we have to get this approved by the
These
state.
are the exact questions.
So then technically people may not know what the district-wide vote is. And they might not fully understand. Yeah, that's my question, so.
They
I'm
also
not
may
finished
not-
with my question. I'm not finished with her. So that was one of my questions. So they may not know in fact what a district-wide vote is or the ramifications of a district-wide vote. That was one of, and the other question that I had is that when you say, would you support a project if the state paid 40%, do they know what the total cost of that project is that we're getting the 40% reimbursement?
No, this isn't the question.
I just wanted to say before you continue with questions, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Judy Taylor from Carlisle was deeply involved in fashioning these questions, because we had to run these by the Office of Campaign and Political Finance.
And they came back.
And they came back and rejected two questions, or the phrasing of two questions. So Judy and I were on the telephone with Dave Paliotis, I think it was twice. We couldn't actually have an in-person meeting because Judy was kind of beat up. So I just want to thank her for doing that. And,
Well, there were some times, I don't remember particularly specifically, but times when we did try to put in more explanation, and the Office of whatever rejected because we had to be.
And I appreciate the limits that they have.
Right.
My concern is that, and I've been a recipient of the phone call, and the listener, but if you don't have the information and I ask questions, they say, oh, just answer the question and I don't have any further information for you. That is my concern with a poll, that people really don't understand what they're listening. That's just my opinion.
One thing that I would offer, and I don't need to go one way or the other on that, sometimes you can see it pushed in the other direction if they're hit with a very large number and they don't understand the context of that number. They may just be reacting to a large number versus the specific ecosystem in which that number exists, and that can happen going up in terms of favorability and down in terms of not being favorable. So that's just, if I were an explanation why sometimes we go in the meeting.
But you will give me the information tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
They also might not know the difference between an open town meeting and a representative town meeting. They're two very
If they're
different
from that town that they call.
town meeting forums. So I think that could be another factor.
But if you're calling from that town, they know exactly how that town runs, so.
Yeah, these are written calls in the voters list that we're provided with. So not everyone's like fully aware of what goes on in their town. Some may be very quickly involved, say some may be very quickly involved, but we can't even tell that from our voters. That was not one of the questions that they're very quickly involved in the town. So,
Yeah, could you, do you happen to know how many actual phone calls were made that the 400 responded?
I can tell you that it's a lot.
Yeah. 800?
It can
No,
be
that was
at least, it's usually at least 10 to 1, so probably in the order of 4,000 plus.
4,000 calls, you have 400 responses. And when you get a non-response, is it because they're not home normally or because they just don't want to take it?
Yeah, so like actually I did one of David's polls doing calling earlier this year, and honestly you probably get 1 or 2 responses per hour. So you don't get very much. Most people just don't answer the phone. Some people aren't interested and just don't want to waste their time on the poll. So you get very limited. So you make tons and tons of calls, probably hundreds an hour.
But you don't happen to know the exact number for this.
We could get that for
We
you.
do have the exact.
I'm curious to have that.
We have the exact number, we can get it for you. Also, something to note that that ratio of 10 to 1 is something that's been around since even the mid-80s, so it's not necessarily a reaction to fewer people having landlines. And we did add cell phones into this mix to specifically account for that. Yeah, you were next.
Yes, I noticed that the number for those who know someone in the district is 53%, which that's on page 2. Struck me as surprisingly high, at least for my community in Boxborough. I suspect that the average voter attending a town meeting, 53% is not a student. Which leads me to the kind of questions that the chair was just asking. So let me just ask you, this was done.
Is this the slide you're referring to? Sorry to interrupt.
Page 2.
We have a different numbering.
Yeah, 53%.
Okay, great.
The poll was taken between August 25 and August 25 and August 28. Let me ask you, why were those days selected?
Typically, we have polls in field for 3 to 5 days. So it was to have the results back in time that we could run a proper analysis. It was just contingent upon the timeline that was sketched out on the project.
Based on your experience with conducting the poll in the last week of August, can it be skewed, and if so, in what way?
No, I don't believe so. I have encountered a time of year when results do tend to be skewed, and it's the week between Christmas and New Year's. We suspend all polling during those times, but in the summertime, we haven't found any skew.
Yeah, to add on to that, we do the polling at that time to find out what the field is at that very moment. The future, it may change, but at that very moment, that is what the dark call.
Okay. What time during the day do these calls made?
We typically will go into field around 5 or 6 o'clock on the first night and monitor the progress for an hour or two. Following that, I believe that we call as early as 10 in the morning throughout the day for the remaining days.
Do you have a breakdown of the time that the calls were made?
I suppose something like that could be found, though I have never personally looked at.
I don't take
regular
level because he does mostly contact with the call center.
All right. And just follow up on the chair's question. The 10-to-1 ratio you're referring to, I understand you say it's fairly typical when you do phone calls. Is that right? Are you able to go back and look at that and say what percentage of those who didn't want to respond were not willing to support the school? Did they make any comments that would allow you to infer that?
We could potentially look at transcripts, though the amount of time and effort to attempt to read anything like that would be so massive as to cost almost as much as writing the poll itself.
So we don't know that.
So we can only take the answers from people who complete the entire survey, because if we didn't take the entire survey, it would skew the information. So we would only use the information from the completed surveys.
Okay, you say you selected 50% landlines and 50% cell phones, is that right?
That was the targeted calls, correct?
Why that target?
Because, especially in the modern day, a lot of people use their cell phones, and some people don't even have a landline anymore. I know people are switching. So we're slowly moving over to getting more cell phones. Because actually, Dave said that we didn't get a 50-50. He said actually, because most people got a phone call or cell, he said, please call me my landline instead. So it ended up being a 60-40 versus being first landlines.
In your
But 50%.
general political polls, what split do you use between landlines and cell phones?
The 50-50 going in is the standard ASPCA for all.
Now, are the questions that are printed here in this slide presentation the actual script that we use?
Yes, that's correct. Also, to go back to your question, I think what you were getting at with people who rejected the survey versus, who didn't want to take it at all versus those who took it. We see no difference overall in terms of the opinions of people who decide to not take a survey versus those who opt in. We don't find that there's more negativity among those that opt out or more positivity among those who opt in.
All right, is it your position that the results of this poll are transferable to the results we're likely to see if we call either a special town meeting or annual town meeting? Or do you have no opinion about that?
If you called it today, yes.
Well, I would say basically how the polls conducted, the initial points, it's pretty much like a 95% confidence level. So if we did do this the same exact way, same questions, same calling center, that 95 times out of 100 would get the same answer.
That's a different question. My question is not what would happen if you replicated the phone poll. My question is, how does this phone poll, in your opinion, translate to what we would be likely to see if we had a special town meeting this fall or an annual town meeting next May? Different question.
Okay, so you're looking for more like active,
Yeah, how did, in your experience, I assume you have done polls before over the telephone that ultimately appeared on a ballot at a town meeting. Is that a fair assumption?
Over the past 6 years that I've worked with David, we've done statewide, but focused mostly on Senate races, mayoral races, and also
So you
specific
don't have
townwide.
any experience?
No, I have a lot of experience doing exactly this type of thing, absolutely.
You understand what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Have you done any polls over the phone for a ballot question that subsequently appeared on a town meeting, either an annual town meeting or a special town meeting?
Yeah, quite a few, quite a few. I say north of 50.
Okay, and how, in your experience, how have the results of your phone polls related to the subsequent results of those annual or special town meetings?
I would say that they are close, but the important thing to note here is that these numbers are not a forecast of how things will turn out. There are a lot of factors that will happen between now and any sort of vote that may happen. That will be whether or not meetings on the individual level are held, the number of meetings that are held there, the type of communication put forth by those who oppose and those who support. There's a lot that can happen between now and May. If the election was held tomorrow, or the vote was held tomorrow, I believe that you would see something very, very similar to these results. If you talk about in May, you're talking about a lot of things that can happen between now and then. That said, this isn't Donald Trump versus somebody else, right? We're not going to see these wild swings, I don't believe, but it will depend entirely on what happens in this community between now and then.
But it's your opinion that the people that self-selected to respond to your phone inquiry would also self-select to go to the polls at a town meeting?
No, we did not ask that specific question.
Okay.
For registered
Thanks.
voters.
I'm a Sunday junkie, so to speak. And do you happen to have available the number of eligible voters within the 16 towns and the number of likely voters within the same 16 towns?
Don't we have that in front of us? We designed the sample frame based off of registered voters in the area.
I'm sorry?
We designed the sample frame off of registered voters.
Registered, that's eligible.
Yes.
Yeah. But we have.
No, I'm sorry, eligible voters who have filled out the paperwork and have a voter ID number attached to them.
Yeah.
Versus eligible voters, which is technically a much larger portion of the population.
But not unlikely.
6,000, like, eligible voters.
Yeah, it's
usually
eligible.
get less, 3,000, and that has to be something on fire.
Yes, absolutely. But what you want to do in situations like this, and you certainly have to follow up with a more nuanced answer here, but it's important to survey your entire likely universe of people that may participate. If you begin excluding people who may participate, you actually run the risk of too soon filtering people out that may be very important to the process. So it's important to start wide, and that happens in any situation, whether it was somebody running for a statewide race or a national election, and then only when you come into the actual final stretch do you typically pull into the likely voters.
But the eligible voters then, in the 16 towns, I think, you're looking for a number, do you have it?
Yeah, we have the total on each town, and I believe it comes to a total of. Yeah, we don't know we don't have the exact number right. I could find it by the reading.
Ballpark? 172,000.
Yeah, I think among all the communities, all three areas, 170,000 registered voters.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Any other question?
I just want to say that I find this very interesting because it sort of correlates with my experience, which is that a lot of people do seem to know some of the Minuteman, even though my assumption going into the conversation is always that they won't. They almost always do.
Yeah.
And so this is very interesting to me because it is the first time I've actually seen something that confirms my own experience, which has always been do appreciate the efforts that you went to make this being a leader of 538.
And I was actually, reading that same thing, but I actually had a different spin on it, based on, again, the fact that when you think about college or anything, right, you look at specifically, Foxborough, there was this impression from me that you were surprised at that number. But the reality is you have to realize that the corresponding relationships can span, because again, the school's been here since the late 70s. Okay, it doesn't say recent graduates, it doesn't say in our town, it's you know anybody. And the relationships of networks and social networks are such that if you look 6 degrees from any angle, you probably are connected to somebody in that pool. So that relationship actually just jives with that.
Well, I think the reverse may also be true. That 53% represents roughly 5% of the actual phone calls they made, and it may well be that the 5% that knows someone that went to Minuteman self-selected as willing to answer the questions. So that's why I'm trying to weigh how much validity to give this.
Again, any poll has skew, but you have to look at the confidence level of any poll data as whether or not you feel that the poll or the pollsters have sampled the correct side. And again, given the respondent side of any sample, I mean, we got 400 participants, right? That is a relatively good sample size based on this type of
Especially for a district, it's actually a higher sample size than the moment conducted, so it's supposed to be more representative.
I use the quality analysis, right. And again, sample sizes like this is what you would expect within what you would find in this type of a sample. And again, based on their experience, we actually got a better sample. So the confidence level was 95% plus or minus 4 point something.
So I can respond to that?
Yeah.
Because my understanding is that you kept making calls until you got to the 95% level, is that right?
Correct.
Right, so they were going to get the 400 and how many respondents?
400.
They were going to get 400 respondents, however many calls they had to make. So you can't really say that because they got 400
But
respondents.
in order to do that, you have to do the density side within each subpopulace, right? So their methodology is a standard practice.
Well,
okay. Right? You keep sampling until you get your sample size.
All right, excuse me.
You make it
I'm going to butt in here for a minute.
Sure.
It's almost irrelevant, but as a high school teacher, I have limited understanding of this. I have taught AP statistics a number of times. And one of the things we learned is we raise red flags in statistical operations, including things like polls. And there is selection bias in polls in that you cannot force everybody to respond, which means that your both points are correct. It is correct that there could be bias in the sense that people who know about the school may have different answers than the people who don't know much about the school. And yet, despite all these flaws, which are true in just about any poll, they still have some validity. Now, how seriously you take it is going to be a personal judgment, because there's no way that you can guarantee the result. I'm always at least somewhat skeptical of polls, and yet I cannot ignore the results either. And I do believe that if we move along with good communications, then the percentage of people who understand the schools and the issues we're going to face is going to increase, and hopefully we'll end up in this arena. Your skepticism is to some extent shared, and yet, as I say, this method is used all the time, sometimes more successfully than other times. So we look at these results. We'll all have our own grain of salt. Some grains of salt may be bigger than others. I know mine is always quite big, as I'm sure the superintendent is aware from his dealings with me over the years. And that's really all that you can say. These gentlemen cannot in any way guarantee that these results would hold true, even if we were to have. They're very confident, but the results, if we did have a vote today, may differ from this, may be the same from this, don't know 100%. Nevertheless, there is some reason for optimism, even with the grain of salt, and at least some of these numbers are fairly promising. So,
I'm going to jump into wrap things up if there aren't any more questions. Just building on what you said.
One more comment over here before we wrap it up.
With respect to self-selection, I'll just point out that people who attend town meeting or go to polls are almost by definition self-selecting, because they're willing to take the effort to get themselves from one place to another and sacrifice the time, which may be more difficult than committing to a 5-minute telephone conversation. And I don't mean that to weigh in this direction or that direction with respect to the relevance of this poll to what would happen at town meeting, especially because in some ways we make the point that several months will, whatever route we decide to go, several months will pass between now and then. And the other thing we're talking about is how we're going to educate that public about the project and get their input to it.
What it tells me is we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do to educate town officials and citizens about what our decisions are that they're going to have to make. And that's what this raises to me is our work has to begin today to start going out and communicating with our peoples, because I'd like to see a higher portion of people at least know about lending and be involved in this process, because it's a lot of money we're going to be spending. And they need to pay attention to the amount of money we're spending and how we're going to do it. So I look at this as helpful, but it tells me we need a lot more work.
Jack.
Just a request or a point of information, Jeff. I'd like to share this with folks in my town. Can we get Liz to send us a copy by PDF so that we can distribute it within our community?
It's a public document. Go for it. Just before you wrap it up, I just have one.
We all have.
Yeah.
We all have.
Yeah. I want to thank Judy again. You may recall that when we were having the vote as to whether we were going to go ahead with this, there was some skepticism in that if the people involved would understand the school well enough to construct a survey that would have merit. And I said that the only reason I was going to vote to move ahead was that Judy had piped up and said, oh, right, exactly what you said. You said, bye. So she piped up and described her experience with this sort of operation. First mistake, right? So instant volunteer. So the fact that you were involved in this gave me the confidence to go forward. I'm not sorry. So thank you.
We didn't even know we had that.
So if you could, final comment?
Yeah, so just the last thing I'd like to say is, again, sort of summing up everything that we've talked about here so far. When you look at interpreting the results in research, one thing that we often, especially things like 538, lead us away from would be the idea that it's an art and it's a science. The art is definitely in the interpretation of these numbers. What does that 53% mean? How do we understand it in what context it's in? And there is not necessarily a solid right or wrong answer. The one thing that I am incredibly confident in about this poll is the science behind it that we used at Suffolk University and DAPA research that we've shown time and time again getting results that are on the money. I think we can be very confident in the methodology that was used. I think we also have to be open about how we understand the data that was received. And overall, I think that strong support, what we may think about it as people are open to having a conversation. People are open to hearing about it. They're ready to learn more, as we said earlier. And I think that is, if there's a warm reception to having this conversation, is probably the way that we may most politically correct and interpret exactly what that number means at such an early stage with a very wide group of people that are raised.
Okay, so thank you very much, gentlemen. Item 6.
So item 6, we have with us Rick Manley, who's I think a resident of the district still, right?
Yes.
Rick, you want to join us up at the table there, or anywhere special?
Okay, sure.
There also are some related materials at your table. There's an opinion letter that was updated on 9/2 from Ed Lennox. This part of our time here is to discuss specifically what was alluded to by Len from Sudbury in regards to the choices that are available to the school committee for incurring debt under 16N or 16B. I was going to say something profound, but I'll save it. But Rick, want to give us an overview of 16N and B, and then this is just an open discussion for folks to ask questions. There seems to be confusion in a number of different areas, and I'm hoping that we can at least give everyone on our school committee the correct information, give everyone, an hour to ask questions to make sure you walk away from this understanding clearly. And then at a later date, we'll have a discussion as a school committee regarding the debt and what pathway we're going to take towards getting the yes. So welcome, Rick. I really appreciate your being here again with us.
Well, thanks. I'm happy to be here. I do live in Weston, and until this spring when I retired, I was on the school committee in Weston for 9 years. So it's a little bit scary to be going to a school committee meeting, although it's really nice because I'm not having to run it or anything like that. I just get to show up for a little bit. One thing I professionally I have to tell you is that my office specializes in the issuance of bonds and notes by cities and towns, largely in Massachusetts, and we do work for all of the towns in the district from time to time when they do bonds. So necessarily what I can tell you today is about the process, the law. What I can't tell you is what you should do, right? I'm not allowed to do that. You don't want me to do that anyway, but I just wanted to let you know I've been here from time to time, and maybe for those of you who might have seen me before, I usually just like to make that clear to everybody so that I professionally, that's sort of the extent of what I can help you with. If you really want to fight it out, you get town council and district council, and they can all have a good time with that, but that's not really where I can help, just so you understand that. But what you have is is sort of the traditional approach. When I say traditional, it's not really fair to say, but the majority approach for authorization of debt by regional schools, comes out of Chapter 71, Section 16D, that I'm sure you're familiar with. Essentially what happens is a majority vote of the committee votes to authorize debt, notifies the towns, within 7 days, and they have 60 days during which they can act or not to express approval or disapproval of the debt. That's kind of a general rule, I'm sure you're aware. It is not the only way to do this. There are some districts, Tri-County is one, Franklin County Voc is another, where the agreement calls for a district-wide election to approve debt. For many years, the only way that you could utilize that method of approval that's set out in general laws is if you had it specifically referenced in your district agreement. And so that's sort of where that stood for a long time. I think sometime in the 1990s, maybe early 90s, Chapter 71, Section 14D of the general laws was amended, and it said, notwithstanding the usual rule about having to have a district-wide election provided for specifically in your agreement, that a two-thirds vote of the members of the district could instead vote to utilize a district-wide election, even if it were not set forth in the agreement. I think this came from the experience that I think a few districts in Western Mass were having, where you might have, the overwhelming majority of the communities voting yes, and then one, for whatever reason, that just didn't want to do it, and so in a way, it was kind of having an unfortunate effect on sort of the majority of the towns and the majority of the voters' ability to get something done. I know the first one of these that I ran into was at Tantascwa, I think in 95 or 6, and in that case, the town of Wales, which is very, very small, oftentimes would vote yes at the town meeting, but it would vote no at the debt exclusion that the town meeting vote was contingent on. So, unfortunately, the usual method for approvals sometimes could end up having maybe an unintended effect of a veto by a very small minority of folks. So I think that's why they amended the law the way they did. So what does that mean? What it means is that if the school committee wants to decide to have a district-wide election, you need to vote to do that by the committee, 2/3 vote to do that, and then actually coordinate with especially town clerks, but also the selectmen in the towns to figure out how to do this mechanically, because it's just kind of a lot of things all going on at once. The election is actually an election by the district, so while it occurs town by town, it's really the district that will create a warrant calling an election, which folks familiar with the process in the towns would be familiar with. It looks just like a warrant that you might see for calling a town election. And the district needs to coordinate closely with the town clerks and the selectmen to be sure that it's on a day when everybody can sort of handle this, because it has to be all done on the same day. So you've got an awful lot of towns to worry about here if you want to do that. And then you also have to arrange for the preparation and delivery of all the ballots. And of course, it's likely that there's not one sort of voting mechanism or machine, counting equipment, whatever used in all towns. So again, coordination is very important to understand how to get that done. When I've seen it done lately, I know that districts have frequently had a couple of group meetings with the town clerks once they've decided to go that way, to kind of get that all set up in a manner that folks feel comfortable with. And then so on a particular day that the election would happen, and it would just be a majority vote then of the individual residents, or voters, turning up to be a district election. So on the one hand, you have the sort of town by town, one town could vote no, and that would stop the authorization of debt, or the other, a majority vote of the individual voters in the district as a whole. Majority vote can approve of that. So it sounds pretty straightforward, right? Yeah.
Rick, 2 questions. First, I want to make sure I heard you correctly, because I may not have. Did you say it required a 2/3 vote of this body to go forward with that?
Yes.
Thank you. And second one, I read somewhere it has to be between 4 to 8 hours consecutively. There's no option to say, gee, the peak periods of voting in communities are 7 to 9 and 5 to 7, so you couldn't have a vote that is designed to capture when people are most likely to vote.
Right, I think unfortunately when the polls are open, they're open. There really isn't a mechanic for saying, well, we'll have it open for, 2 hours or 3 in the morning, and we'll close it down a little bit in the middle of the day when folks aren't around, and we'll open up again. But it's kind of a blunt instrument, and it is curious that the statute says that the polls shall be open no less than 4 and no more than 8. Because in most communities I'm familiar with, you might not have the polls open at 7, and they might well be open until 8, right? I don't know why that is, but that's kind of what it's done.
Is there any ability to have a absentee vote? Where
Sure.
it could be, or you can be absentee?
I'm a little concerned when I look at D, is the school committee takes their vote, and then they go to the towns, and they have 60 days, the towns have to call a town meeting?
Yes.
And if they do not, it's approval?
Yes.
So, I'm gonna turn that off a minute.
No, it was mine.
Was it? So, what bothers me is most of our towns have a town meeting schedule. And that town meeting schedule starts in
The end of March.
March and it goes to June. And that's traditionally how we operate in our towns. Now we're asking our towns to do something totally different. We're asking them to hold a special town meeting. The special town meetings are expensive. You're also, I dislike special town meetings because you get a small percentage of people generally out, and they usually favor in one way or another. I think they're very undemocratic. Is there any way around that?
Yes. We had to do that at Blackstone Valley vote a few years ago. The very same problem. I think they only had 13 towns. If I do that from memory, I think it was that many. And they had the same problem. So what they did was they voted to approve the debt, but they added a condition to the vote that they took, and they said, okay, we know that there's this 60-day business that's approval, but the vote by its own terms said, well, that's fine, but this vote is no good unless everyone has approved by June 30. So you put your own condition on yourself. So even though as a state law matter, the 60 days will have run out, the vote by its terms, says, well, it's no good until everybody's had a chance to vote by, in that case, it was June 30.
Related to that, the problem I see is that if our stance is going to be, we'll let the towns have a chance, and if it doesn't work that way, we want to go the other route. We can't do what was just recommended here, because we're going to run out of time. Because the last town meeting could reject it. When's the last town meeting?
Sometime June 30th.
Yeah, June 30th, they could say, that could be the one that they say no. And now you have no time left for another vote, so.
But we can, okay, that's the way it is today.
Yep.
Sure.
So the MSBA also has another calendar in play, right? So they have a 120-day calendar?
They do. They usually, the regulations require that the funding be approved within 120 days of their vote to award the grant. Working with regional school districts, in my experience, I have found that the MSBA is very understanding about the mechanic necessary to approve debt. And I think so long as you're in close coordination with the folks over there, they've been fine with that, understanding that, look, you've taken the vote at the committee level to get going. You either scheduled a district-wide election or you've got the mechanic in motion. They're all right with that.
I have one question about the district-wide. So what is the total elapsed time from the moment that the school district decides to do that to the time when the election could occur, including all of the different contingencies like absentee ballots that have to be put out a certain number of days before the election and so forth?
Yeah, there are a number of things that have to happen. I think clerks are supposed to be told about an election at least 35 days before the election so that they can, order ballots, and the language has to be, I think, run by the folks at the Secretary of State's Elections Division. There's a bunch of things that have to be done. I would get it wrong if I tried to tell you right now how that works, but we did put together a timeline for the folks over at BayPath, I guess, when they did theirs, and sort of work that through. But in general, you're talking about a reasonable period of time, just working backwards from an election. You've got to take the vote, call the election yourself. The election, I think, needs to be posted, warned. I think 7 days before the election is to happen.
Right.
But there's a whole lot that would have to happen well before then in terms of getting everything ready, including the coordination with individual towns. So you're probably talking a couple of months anyway. Yeah.
This is the first time that I've heard 2/3 majority vote of this body to,
If you'd like to utilize the district-wide election option.
okay, and what about if you don't, if you just want to go 16B?
It's majority vote.
Just a majority, so the district-wide option is 2/3.
That's right.
Okay, and then, The second question I had was that if the regional agreement says that it should go to town meeting, and the school committee votes a 2/3 majority, then 16N overrides the
Yes.
regional agreement contract?
The regional agreement was and is subject to the general laws as they're in effect from time to time. And the general laws specifically provide that notwithstanding the usual rule that has to be in the agreement, you can do this even if it isn't in your agreement. So the general laws kind of win out over the terms of the agreement because the agreement's subject to the general laws. It's in effect when it's approved and as it might change from time to time.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
From time to time is a fascinating phrase. The statute was amended, as you pointed out, over a number of years. So let me ask you, and I recognize that the statute as it presently exists is what empowers this group to incur debt, or seek to incur debt. However, the decision we're going to be putting to either the voters of the district at large or the individual towns is a political decision. So fairness comes into the political equation. So let me ask you, when was Section N adopted?
Section N, I think, was adopted with all of Chapter 71, Section 16, which goes back quite a ways, I guess. I think maybe in the late 50s, I think 71 came into play, 71-16.
All right, well, earlier you said that up until, I believe, the early 90s,
Yeah.
the way in which debt was to be incurred was through a district-wide vote necessarily, is that right?
It was, unless specifically provided for in your agreement, yes.
Right, okay, and our agreement is silent on...
That's right, so that means that 16D would have pertained only until such time as 14D was amended.
Okay, so what I'm getting at is, if we have to go back to our voters and tell them what we're planning to do, and the question was asked, well, when we signed up and joined the district, what were the rules that governed it then? What's the answer?
Yeah, at that time, the agreement was silent on the authorization of debt, so that the only option that was available was the town meeting approval town by town.
Right, so when did the district-wide vote option become available?
I think it was in 1995.
Okay. So I put that out there because, and I think Ford has already addressed one of the relevant concerns. If we're going to go to the voters district-wide, then one of the concerns we have to address is, well, the legislature changed the rules since you joined the district. It's their right to do it. It's binding by law, and this is perfectly appropriate, but that's the answer to why we're doing it this way. If we go to town meeting, or a special town meeting, which I share Ford's views on special town meetings, I think they self-select. So if we do that, then once again, we have to tell people that either you're going to have to call a special town meeting within 60 days, or you'll have to make the kind of adjustment that you suggest so that they can do it at a regularly scheduled town meeting. So, I just raised these because when we, as a body, decide what type of process we want to use, we're thinking about the political ramifications of how we're going to explain it to the voters, whether we go district-wide or whether we go town by town.
That's assuming most towns don't want to reject it. Because if most towns approve it, they don't have to do anything.
All towns have to.
Right, I don't call here.
Have to not or not.
It's not disapproval.
Not disapproval.
Right.
All the towns.
Just a request, could we have a copy of Ed Legacy's letter? Sorry, by email, a file.
It'll be PDF.
Yeah, that's
Just
fine.
received it.
This is a question of what is meant by majority or 2/3. By 2/3, I assume you be meaning 2/3 of all the communities, not 2/3 of the people who show up at that meeting? Is that what meant by 2/3?
2/3 of a quorum?
2/3 of a quorum.
So we can have a quorum of the meeting.
So it's not, wouldn't be 11
You don't have weighted voting or anything like that, as far as I remember, right?
So 2/3 of a quorum. Quorum
I thought it said 2/3 of member towns.
Or 2/3 of the members, but we would read that to be a public forum.
Could you verify that, please? Because there are some votes that it's an important issue, and some of the votes do specify 2/3 of all the member towns. So we really need that to be, and for majority as well. For majority, it usually has meant in the past, the majority of the people who show up when we have a quorum. But it could mean something different in this particular context, so if you could just check those two things, is that what it's meant, I'd appreciate it.
Based on your experience with the few really districts that have gone, based on the experience you've had with the districts that have gone to the district-wide vote, do they set up the procedures in parallel so that they're anticipating if there is a failure in the town meeting cycle, that they're going to be able to put this other system in play in time to meet all the deadlines for it?
I have not seen that consciously done before. I'm not saying that you couldn't do that, or that you should or you shouldn't do that. I really don't have an opinion about that. When I've seen it utilized most often is when the district has made an effort to approve under 16D, and for whatever reason, one or more towns have opted to just approve the debt, and then they kind of sort of regroup on the point and then opt to go the other way. But in my experience, I haven't seen a situation where it's kind of all set up, because the thing is, when you, I guess to the extent that you wanted to be, very strategic about it, you could get everything done and then call your election, I suppose. But an awful lot has to happen to do that. And I think most folks have taken the view that they'll try very hard to see if how it goes in the first go around, town by town, and then later give it a try if they feel that's the only way to proceed. I haven't seen it done any more consciously than that.
Sort of related to that, though, and I'm not asking your opinion, but we have constraints put on us by the MSBA to complete the process of Module 5 by June 30th, 2016, which I think no other district has had, because we've been in the pipeline for so long. We're beginning our 7th year in the MSBA pipeline, and they've only been around 10 years. So that's what's a consideration for this school.
My question is about which method may have trumped power over the other. I mean, clearly, because it's the way they sort of lay it out, if town meetings were to, if one or more were to vote in opposition, there's no debt, and then the school committee would say go to the ballot would override if it prevailed, right? The ballot would override the town meeting.
Well, it's not so much an override as such, but rather, it's the authorization of debt anew and trying again to approve the new debt in a different way, but effectively that's what happens.
Is there any mechanism by which, if it were our choice to go straight to the ballot, some town could have a special town meeting to reject?
No.
And reverse it? Okay, thank you.
Is there anything online that tells why the legislature passed a particular kind of vote? Is there a rationale for it? Is it like for 16? And if I went to Massachusetts legislature website or whatever, would I be able to find a rationale for it? Just curious.
You're not the first person to ask if there's a place to check the rationale for what the legislature does.
Well, at least what they told the public.
No, unfortunately, in Massachusetts, legislative history is kind of scant in a lot of things, so I haven't found anything on it, and I went looking for it. In particular, the amendment under 14D, because I was quite interested to find out who pushed that, and I was unable, many years ago, to kind of get to the bottom of it, because there were a lot of folks scratching their head on it, you know, depending on how you came out on a particular bond issue, liked it or didn't like it. So there were a lot of people quite interested in trying, and I was unable to find anything myself.
But I will vote. Thank you.
But please, if you follow something, I'd like to know too.
Okay, Ed?
Henry Hall had a role in writing that, didn't he?
He might have, but he didn't tell me. He was my old boss, but
He claimed to have a role in a lot here.
yeah.
I believe he did.
I think he was the first chairman of the school committee.
Yes. I have two questions about, just to clarify, under 16N, there is no contingency of an added debt exclusion vote on the decision of the majority. But under 16B, some towns may approve it contingent upon a debt exclusion vote. So we would have to have two votes in that town.
We have had, votes, or ballot questions for folks to vote on within the district election, that are contingent on a local Prop 2.5 exclusion, debt exclusion for their share of the debt. You know, so they can, and so you put the question you might put on the ballot would say, you know, do you approve of the debt authorized by the committee on such and such a day, provided, you know, that debt exclusion passes in, you know, your town, let's say. And so what happened was, in fact, 2 elections on the same day in each town that wanted to do this, so that there was one town ballot on which was the question, you know, should we have the debt exclusion for our share of the regional school debt? And there was another ballot, different ballot box, same day, same town, for do you approve of the debt at all? So it required two different elections being held simultaneously. So it can be done.
Is it required?
No.
So this committee could vote under, let's just use 16N, the district-wide election. This committee could vote a motion that whose language did not include the requirement for a debt exclusion.
Sure.
Would that same option be available under 16D?
Yes.
Yeah, just to follow up on Carrie's question as to whether one of these provisions trumps the other. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as I read these, they are independent alternative methods of funding.
Mm-hmm.
And if you try one and it fails, you can still try the other, however illogical it might seem to go to a district-wide vote, have it fail, and then go back to the towns, you can still do that.
Yeah, yeah.
So as far as debt exclusion, this is something we've been talking about, because Lancaster's portion of this is substantial. If it's not part of the language, how does the town go around? Can we just do that separately? Make it a debt exclusion, go to the ballots in the same way we do any debt exclusion?
You're speaking in the case of a town meeting vote to approve?
Either one, I mean, either way. Is there, no, mostly I'm thinking of the district-wide ballot. If it's not part of the language of the district-wide ballot, my assumption is if we go to town meeting, we get to write the warrant article, and we can put the debt exclusion
That's right.
contingent.
Yes.
But if it goes to a district-wide ballot, how do we then
I think
process it so that we can have a debt exclusion?
You can always have a debt exclusion anytime you want, even once the debt's been approved and so forth, assuming.
So we go through the same process?
You can have a ballot question to do that. But I think the question you're asking is, should the vote, or the ballot question that's on the ballots prepared by the district be contingent in the first case?
My assumption is that every town would be different, so.
My understanding is that whether you go the district-wide vote or you go the town meeting vote, individual towns do not come up with the question itself. So we as the Minuteman School Committee, give the towns, whether it's town meeting or public election, the specific wording that's being approved. And that can either be subject to individual towns with debt exclusion, But if that wording does not predicate the approval on debt exclusion, towns are committed to their share of the debt, regardless of whether they approve a debt exclusion.
In other words, the debt exclusion is the business of the home community and not of the district.
Unless we allow it to be
Right.
a condition.
But I don't think we should allow it because it's a decision to be made by each individual community. And they can do it or not, they can do it at the same time, or they can do it later.
Well, if we allowed it, we would potentially have to win 32 votes.
And not every town would necessarily want to exclude the debt or need
Some
to.
are very, some are tiny towns. They wouldn't, they just take it out.
They work an election to exclude it.
No.
But again, you could, if you wanted to, say, you know, but the debt won't be any good unless everyone who wants to have an election before a certain date on this question, held them and approved them. You know, there are lots that you can draft it however you want, depending on what you feel is most appropriate.
Just a comment on tiny towns. My understanding is that the debt vote, whether it's town meeting or general election, has to be in each town for the entire amount of the debt, and the entire amount of the debt is the full cost of the school project, not net of the MSBA reimbursement. So if this is a $145 million project, even though the MSBA is paying 40% plus, every community will have in the ballot question, does your town authorize the borrowing of $145 million for a school project? Is that correct?
Well, it is, but I think there's a significant nuance to it, and that is that the district, of course, has to approve the whole amount of borrowing. The MSBA requires that, and the DOR requires that. And, you know, that's because, of course, you're going to enter into a contract, let's say, with someone to build the whole thing, and you need a whole appropriation, right? But the vote, the formal vote, you know, at least the essence of the formal vote, will come from the MSBA's set of required votes, and that vote will say, among other things, that the amount of the authorized borrowing shall be reduced to the extent of the amount set forth in the project funding agreement.
Okay.
So it will be, and that'll be self-executing. So if you're assuming that you're approving after the vote to award the grant's been taken, folks will see the large number, but they'll also be well aware, or can be made aware of the grant component.
That does require a lot of voter education because it does scare people. It did scare people in the Bay Packers. When they first tried to get their project approved, they had that language on the ballot and without any explanation. It was a problem.
The form of vote, I would add, does also indicate the percentage that you expect to get. So it'll say that we'll get a grant not to exceed the lesser of some percentage and the amount that's actually approved by the MSBA, because sometimes it moves a little bit here and there depending on points for, you know, green activities or things of that nature. So if you look at the vote, you can think about it and say, well, we're supposed to get about 40%, let's say, if that's what it is. But you're right, in BayPath, they ended up actually indicating what everyone's estimated share was likely to be in the vote itself. Very good, thank you.
Oh, just the last.
How can voters, again, regardless of which route we're going to go, are going to care about that estimated share? But that estimated share is a moving target over 30 years. How can you include that in the vote? It's a point-in-time number that can change dramatically in a short period of time and certainly over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's not a fixed kind of element in the approval. It's really just the estimated share today is expected to be this. And it's, you know, and it's just as good as that is, yeah.
Dave.
That was exactly my question. Thank you.
There are other districts where the amount is actually set in stone at the time the debt's approved, and it doesn't move with regard to enrollment or anything like that, but most of them don't.
Well, I thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a little problem here. We're finishing early, so we're going to give Vince the wrong idea of the meeting. So he'll think that this is like normal for us to finish early, and I don't want to give the wrong impression.
I like to think that contributed towards getting.
Can I have a motion to adjourn? All in favor of adjourning? I don't see majority. Okay, very good. It passes unanimously. Thank you. See you next week.
Sorry. You have to deal with the sign behind you the whole